Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are going to be doing another deity build, this time for Gond. Gond is not a selectable deity in-game, as you probably already know. However, he does, or I guess they, have a particularly powerful influence in this game, especially in Act 3, as the Gondian gnomes are the ones who made the Steel Watchers for Gordtash, albeit against their will. And as such, you do kind of follow questlines related to Gond as you play throughout the game in Act 1 and 2 by saving He Who Shall Not Be Named. I'm sure you guys all know who I'm talking about. But anyways, I really wanted to do something a bit different with this build compared to other deity builds, and the chat in the live stream where we make these deity builds absolutely agreed. You guys, the members of the community who helped me make this, thought that what we came up with was actually pretty cool. So shout outs to everyone in the community who was a part of this, and if you want to be a part of builds like this in the future, head on over to my live stream. I'm thinking of later today, as of the time of this recording, doing another big build stream for something that isn't deity builds. So make sure you're always keeping an eye out for Discord notifications if you're a member of the Discord for when I start live streaming. Anyways, so for Gond, he himself, or I guess I'll say they, are because they kind of have multiple personas and avatars. Gond is the Lord of all smiths, and is basically known for being the Faerunian god of craft, smithing, and inventiveness. So, forge clerics, blacksmiths, artificers, you know, they're all basically kind of under Gond's banner. The thing is, Gond is basically just all about invention for invention's sake, regardless of potential consequences. Create new things, as many new things as you can, but the problem is they're not really looking at the consequences of what that could be, and what could result from it. Kind of like real life. But regardless, I thought it led to kind of maybe an interesting dynamic, because with these chosen characters, these chosen of the deities that we make for this deity build series, we've looked at basically just chosen ones, or people who were just kind of picked randomly depending on how chaotic the deity themselves are. But we've never really talked about, at least not to my memory, about being chosen via birthright. I think this character that we have in front of us here is a chosen of Gond, not necessarily because they were destined to be so, or because they were picked for some greater purpose, but just because they were born into a family that is in such, you know, devoted service to Gond and the idea of this creativeness that they just kind of get directly blessed by Gond regardless of what they want. And I do think this person would desperately want to live up to the expectations of their family. I do think that they want to be a successful blacksmith. Not necessarily artificer in this case, because I do believe that's a little bit overdone in this game anyway, not to mention the fact that we don't have the artificer class, and I could try to cobble together some kind of wizard cleric thing, but I've kind of done that quite a lot, and I wanted to do something a bit different for this video. And I kind of wanted to have like a clash of like the innate ability that comes from being born into this family and blessed by Gond, with a specific weakness that this character will have that others of his family would not. Because here's the thing, obviously dwarves are the ones that are more known for being blacksmiths, but you know, gnomes can absolutely do it too. But I think in this case, our specific gnome here has a condition. I'm not exactly sure what condition they would have, but it diminishes them physically by a large margin, to the point where they cannot swing a forge hammer. Meaning that in the family's eyes, despite still having Gond's blessing, the fact that they're so physically unable to do most tasks related to their craft kind of makes them useless. At least in the eyes of their family, but still they have this blessing from Gond, they have this desire to create, they want to be inventive, but they just can't. So, they kind of go about it a different way, a somewhat destructive way. You see, this character decided to take the innate blessings granted by Gond and their prestigious family lineage that allows for this kind of, you know, creativity and this power. They're more of a spellcaster. Going for, you know, different spells that their own family members would use, because in this case, as you kind of may have seen from the thumbnail, we're doing a focus on fire and thunder with this build. Fire being the hot embers used for the forge, being able to light the forge and meld any sort of metal into the shapes that they desire, and thunder, which is the clang of the hammer of the forge against metal, forging fine weaponry and armour for all to use, or even just parts for artificing. Because I think think this family in particularly would have branches of artificers, branches of blacksmiths, and even branches of bards, because again, inventiveness and creativity also comes in the form of art and music, so, you know, bards as well. And maybe this guy could have been a bard, but perhaps that's not what he was trying to be. But even so, even though he's still rather adept at spellcasting, his physical abilities just leave much to be desired, so he ended up turning to a slightly destructive solution. And we'll kind of get to that more as we go through the video, because this preamble has been long enough, so let's get into the build. So, with this build, like I say, there's going to be a level of innate power that comes from this family lineage, and innate magical power that comes from family lineages, of course we're going to start with Sorcerer. Sorcerer is going to give us access to quite a few things, namely Constitution saving throw proficiency, as well as the ability to use, you know, meta magic later on, and also giving us some base level spells to work with. So, we're going to take a look at those now. First up, our cantrips. Now, unfortunately we don't get a thunder cantrip in this game, which kind of sucks, so I've gone for the kind of selection that you see here. Firebolt's pretty much going to be our main basic damage option here. Just a big ranged fire, well, not a big ranged fire attack, but a decent ranged fire attack that's not going to cost any of our spell slots, which is quite fun to use and will have some synergy with some other stuff that we're going to be doing later. Shocking Grasp is a lightning attack. I've deliberately gone out of my way to not focus on lightning with this build, but I kind of like this one here anyway, just to give us a melee attack option if we need it. But honestly, I could see you swapping this out for Acid Splash, actually. If you wanted to kind of go like the almost like creative artificey route, that rather than you just casting Acid Splash, you're actually creating like a caustic brew of kinds, maybe not quite Tasha's, but you get the point, and you're like throwing it. So you could go for that, it's entirely up to you. I've also got Mage Hand here because I think anybody would kind of want to like use Mage Hand in this kind of position, like just having basically a third hand to help around with whatever they're trying to do, being it forgery or artificing or whatever. It does make sense, so I feel like this would be an innate ability that this character would have, but of course Mage Hand, at least from my understanding of the lore, is based on your own personal physical strength. So even though we've got this floating spectral hand, it's not actually that stronger than it's not actually stronger than, you know, our own physical hands. So it kind of is like another reminder of our character's shortcomings. And finally, Friends. We are a charisma-based caster. We are going to be the face of the party, and Friends is going to help with that. Next up, spells. Of course, I'm picking up Shield. Again, I feel like Shield would be quite an important spell for this character to try and learn immediately, because again, in their mind, they are quite weak, so they need to be able to defend themselves using whatever magical prowess they can, and Shield does feel like a very artificery spell, whether it's done, like, again, we're not directly making an artificer here, but we're definitely taking artificer influences, so I could almost see Shield as less being an innate thing that we cast, or maybe more like some device that us or a family member basically gave to us, so, that they made. So I feel like Shield makes sense here, and of course we're going to go with Thunderwave. Again, the clang of the hammer hitting the forge, that kind of idea is what spurs our power, so we're able to create, like, blasts of like sound, and I feel like every time this character would cast like a thunder spell, you just hear that metal clang every time, which I just think is so cool. Next up, our subclass, we are going to go with Draconic Bloodline. I know this focus is on fire and thunder, and obviously Storm Sorcery would be probably a bit more powerful, but everyone has done like the Storm Sorcery combo that I'm going to be showing off to death, so we decided to go with Draconic Bloodline, letting this class embolden our fire abilities, and then our next multi-class emboldening our thunder abilities. So we went with Draconic Bloodline for fire because it's a lot more interesting. It does give us an armored defense, but we're not really going to be worried about that for this build, because we aren't going to use heavy armor. Next up, we do get to choose our ancestry, and of course we're going to go with red because that is fire, and that's going to give us our first level spell, Burning Hands, which is going to allow us to create the flames for the forge that we're going to need. Next up, Draconic Bloodline. This is just going to let you pick your scales. I've gone for none because I don't actually think this power would necessarily be draconic in nature, I guess. But if you wanted to say that like Gond made a deal with an ancient dragon or something, I could totally see that. Next up, the ability scores. We're going to have our strength at 8, not only because it makes sense for the character, but it's also going to be quite optimal for stat building, because part of this character's destructive tendencies is that in order to use their forge and be able to actually be a blacksmith, they're kind of reliant on giant strength potions. So yes, this is going to be another build that uses potions, but it is for narrative reasons, because this character is straight up addicted to them, to the point where it's destructive. In fact, due to their fate, maybe they even have a bit of trauma, because as you can see, they've got this, you know, burn mark on their face that probably came from an accident at the forge that resulted from their physical weakness, so they suddenly started drinking these potions to be able to make themselves strong, but it is slowly destroying their body, making it so that perhaps over the course of of BG3's narrative, this character is going to kind of go on a maybe a spirally self-destructive path. Maybe you play this as a Dark Urge, totally reasonable to do. Or you could do this where maybe you use the tadpole influence as kind of like a way of like seeing them being able to like give themselves more strength. So maybe they slowly give into the tadpole over time, and that could create some conflict and some problems down the road. Perhaps they become full illithid later on. You never know. Like, I think there's a lot of interesting ways you could go about kind of developing this character's like kind of downward spiral, not only into trying to find a cure for the tadpole, at least initially, trying to save themselves, and by extension all of Faerun by stopping the Dead 3, but also trying to keep their own strength up as they desperately try to live up to the expectations that are set for them now, both by the situation they're placed in and the situation they've been in since birth. I think there's a lot of, unique narrative influence that can come from using the potions in this case, and obviously it makes quite a strong build. As such, also dexterity is at 10. Again, physically weak means that you're not exactly going to be very nimble. It does mean that we are going to be relying on heavy armor for this build in order to get our armor class, but I think that does kind of make sense again. And again, the only reason this person can even wear heavy armor in the first place is because of their blessing from Gond, as well as the fact that they use these potions. Again, everything about this character is riding on this potion addiction, which is obviously not good. Next up, Constitution. Honestly, a bit higher than I would like for this build. Again, I feel like being physically weak would mean perhaps you wouldn't necessarily have a high Constitution. So I've gone for middling at best, because we do need some Constitution for our HP, as well as being able to, maintain concentration on our spells. But honestly, if you really wanted to play this character, freaking dump this stat and pump it into Intelligence instead. Speaking of, I've put Intelligence at 10 instead of maybe putting like Dexterity at 12, because I wanted at least a little bit of Intelligence with this build. And we've got Wisdom and Charisma both at 16, because they are going to be our main spellcasting stats. Next up, skill proficiencies. I've gone with the guild artisan background for obvious reasons, giving us access to history and insight, as well as I've picked religion for obvious reasons, and persuasion just comes naturally as well from being from our background. Sorry, oh no, we get history from being a rock gnome because we're playing a rock gnome, and persuasion and insight comes from the background. My apologies. I've also gone with deception because I feel like this character would end up lying quite a lot. No, I'm fine. No, don't worry about me. I'm not totally, chucking back dangerous magic potions that augment my body in potentially destructive ways behind your back. No, of course not. Yeah, this build has got a lot of narrative influence in it more than anything, and I find that to be quite fun. It's also mechanically interesting. Fire and thunder is it's not a combination you think about very much, but I think it actually makes things quite interesting. So, let's keep going. Next up, at level 2, we are going to take an immediate multi-class dip into our other main class, because there are some proficiencies that we're going to need from it. And of course, we're going with Cleric, and we're taking the Tempest domain. This is going to allow us to augment our thunder side of things as well now. And again, I know I literally said that, oh, now that we're making deity builds for deities that aren't selectable in-game, we don't need to take Cleric levels. But almost every time, Cleric levels still make sense. So, we're going to be playing a Tempest domain Cleric here. There's a few reasons for this. Like I say, we're going to get features related to thunder, including Wrath of the Storm, which allows us to, as a reaction, strike back against an attacking creature, dealing 2 to 16 lightning damage or 2 to 16 thunder damage, which is what we'll primarily be choosing, and the target takes half damage on a successful save, because this build is going to have some melee capabilities. Again, using those strength potions means we can swing a hammer around now, so we're definitely going to do that. So that's quite a fun ability for us, Wrath of the Storm. We're also going to get Thunderwave and Fog Cloud. We already took Thunderwave from our Sorcerer levels, so you can kind of maybe take that out of Sorcerer if you want. It's entirely up to you, respec as you see fit, or replace a spell later on. But this mainly is also going to give us access to heavy armor proficiency, which will give us access to medium as well, and martial weapons, which means now we can use all weapons and armor with this build, which is exactly what we want to do, so that's why we wanted this dip quite early on. We do get to pick a deity, and obviously Gond is not selectable, but Moradin is a close second, so we're going to be going with that. We're also going to be picking up cantrips as well, and I'm thinking we're just going to take the utility cantrips for now. Produce Flame would make sense for this build, but we already have Fireball, so I'm not too worried about picking it up here, but you absolutely can if you want. But we're just going to grab the 3 utility cantrips from Cleric that I absolutely love, that being Resistance, Guidance, and Thaumaturgy. We're also going to be getting some prepared spells, and of course I want to pick up some of our usual shtick. Sanctuary obviously is an amazing spell to give us a bit of divine protection. I can almost see this is like Gond taking pity on our weak physical form to give us us Divine Protection to stop us from just getting broken into immediately. We're also going to be picking up Guiding Bolt. Again, this is a very religious kind of family. Again, getting a direct blessing from Gond means having access to radiant damage at the same time does make sense. Although our focus is on fire and thunder, there's nothing wrong with having an alternative damage type in there if we need to. This also does give the next attack roll against the target that this hits advantage, so at least in the early game, it's another ranged option for us if we desperately need it. But if you feel like you don't want to take it because it's not on theme with the build in your mind, then perfectly fine. I'm also going to be picking up probably the healing spells. I like having a little bit of healing whenever we take cleric levels because there's no reason really not to. But I actually do think there is going to be quite an interesting conflict here because again we're constantly having to heal our body as we break it more and more through the use of potions. So again, it creates this destructive cycle of like breaking our body and then mending it again over and over and again until eventually the character is going to be probably quite deformed as their body slowly starts to heal in slightly wrong ways. This is dark. This is dark as hell. Perhaps I've gone a bit too far. Anyways, let's continue. Next up, we're going to go back to Sorcerer for basically until we're kind of done with it. I'm kind of showing the levels of this build in order, but if there's any sort of mixture of levels that you want to take here, you absolutely can. But we'll just go with Sorcerer for now, and then we'll come back to Cleric later. Because Sorcerer is going to give us access to something I really want to get quite quickly, and that is Meta Magic, giving us sorcery points that we're going to be able to use for various effects. Now, as for the Meta Magic options you can choose here, it's entirely up to you really what you want to pick. I personally like Twinned and Distant Spell personally, but really Careful Spell would also work, and so would Extended Spell for some buffing spells that we're going to be getting later, so choose whatever you like here, but Distant Spell is going to give us basically the ability to be a spell sniper, not with defeat, and Twin Spell allows us to target multiple creatures with buffs or damaging effects, so those are my personal favourites, but I could absolutely see Careful Spell working out here. We can also pick up a spell at this level, and I'm going to be picking up Chromatic Orb as it is going to give us a ranged attack that works for both fire and thunder, so it just makes sense to pick this one up. Next up, at Sorcerer level 3, we are going to gain access to another Meta Magic option, and of course, I'm going with Quicken Spell. Why wouldn't I? We're also going to gain access to level 2 spells at this point, and it's entirely up to you which one of these two you want to pick first, either Scorching Ray or Shatter, because we're going to be getting both. I'm going to be picking up Scorching Ray first, getting a powerful ranged fire attack that can target multiple targets or the same one multiple times to just do a big dollop of damage to them. I'm also at this level probably going to replace Thunderwave since we do have it from Cleric now, and we're going to be putting that into Shatter. We might as well grab Shatter a bit early, giving us access to a ranged Thunderclap attack sort of, that is going to be able to damage all nearby creatures and objects, and creatures made of inorganic material have disadvantage on their saving throws. So overall we now have two powerful level 2 fire and thunder attacks. Next up, at Sorcerer level 4, we're getting access to a few more sorcery points, as well as another cantrip. As for your cantrip, choose whatever you like. I did use Shocking Grasp in my testing, although I never actually cast the spell, but I'll just leave it there for now. We're also getting access to another level 2 spell at this point, and it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. There's not too many things that I think would be necessarily on theme for this build that I won't be getting later from Cleric anyway, so it really is kind of a pick your favorites type situation. Misty Step, Mirror Image, Hold Person can all be quite good. I could even see Enlarge Reduce actually making sense lore-wise, because maybe this character would use this to make themselves bigger so they have a better time, you know, swinging their hammer, even with their small stature. So you know what? I'm going to pick up Enlarge Reduce for the lore reasons. We're also going to get an ability score improvement at this point. No feats on this build, because there's not really a lot of room for them, since we are going to want our stats in different places. So we're going to bump up our Charisma since we're focusing on Sorcerer levels first. Next up, at Sorcerer level 5, we're going to gain access to level 3 spells, and of course I'm taking Fireball. Fireball is going to give us access to a big dollop of fire damage that scales up quite nicely and affects areas in an AoE area. I mean, you all know what Fireball is, I don't really need to go into it. And finally, for Sorcerer at level 6, we're going to get our main subclass feature, Elemental Affinity Damage. Now, all of our fire attacks will deal additional damage equal to our Charisma modifier. This is pretty good. This is going to mean that the fire side of our attack kind of skill set is going to be a bit more powerful, to be on par with some of the thunder options that we're going to be getting later from Tempest Cleric. So there is going to be reasons to use both elements, as they will kind of be on par with each other. You also are going to get Elemental Affinity Resistance, which will allow you to spend a sorcery point to gain resistance to a damage type when you cast a fire spell. You basically get fire resistance. It's not very good, and we're going to have, with the equipment that I have set up, we're going to have constant fire resistance anyway, so this is totally useless. Don't waste your spell points on it. As well as we do get to pick another level 3 spell or lower. Now, it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. Again, there's nothing here that I would necessarily say is required for this build. I mean, Lightning Bolt is there and you can do Tempest Cleric shenanigans with that, but again, I'm trying not to focus on lightning damage here. So I would say things like Counterspell, obviously always good. I used Slow in my testing just because I really like the slow spell, so it's entirely up to you if you want to go with that, but it is kind of a pick your favorite situation, so choose whatever spell you like that you think will be the most useful. Right, let's head back over to Cleric for the rest of our levels now. At level 2 of Tempest Cleric, we're going to get an extra Channel Divinity charge, as well as Turn Undead and Destructive Wrath. You guys all know this one. Whenever you roll Thunder or Lightning damage, you can use your Channel Divinity to deal the maximum amount of possible damage instead. Obviously, the usual combo for this kind of leveling scheme would be Storm Sorcerer plus this, grabbing Lightning Bolt, making enemies wet for double damage, and always dealing max damage with the Destructive Wrath to basically one-shot enemies. But everyone's done that to death already. Heck, I don't think I've ever actually made that build on this channel because everyone else just did it anyway. So I thought, nah, we're not going to be focusing on that here. So we're going to be using this for our thunder damage, which again, is going to mean our thunder damage attacks can be pretty powerful as well as our fire attacks, meaning that, again, as I said, there's reasons to use both. As well as we do get an extra spell at this level, choose whatever you like here. In fact, my spell list has been kerfuffled because I went back over to Sorcerer. Right, we're going to do this, and I'm going to say, let's grab Command, why not? At Cleric level 3, we're going to get access to level 2 spells, including Shatter as well. So again, if you wanted to train out Shatter in when you take some of the later levels of Sorcerer, you absolutely could, and then pick another spell. So you have a lot of freedom with like kind of your Sorcerer spells on this one, again, kind of as you level up. I totally didn't forget that Tempest Cleric gets Shatter, don't question me on it. Next up, Prepared Spells. We do get to pick level 2 spells at this point, and I quite like picking up Aid here, being able to use more the Blessing of Gond to kind of like give ourselves a bit more HP, again, kind of, you know, using artificial, well, not artificial ways, but like outside influences to try and make ourselves a bit stronger. It's going to give us a bit more HP, and again, it's just a very useful spell overall. Also, I'm going to grab Enhanceability. Enhanceability allows us to gain advantage on ability checks, again, magically influencing our body to go beyond its normal limits. Again, rather dangerous. At Cleric level 4, we're going to gain access to another Cleric cantrip. So if you want to, you can pick up Produce Flame for that fire damage, or you can go for Sacred Flame if you want a different type of damage. But I'm going to be going for Produce Flame because I want a blue firearm, because it looks cool. Next up, we do get to pick another spell. It's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. It really doesn't matter. We've kind of got everything that we want. I can see actually picking up Spiritual Weapon would kind of make sense, being able to summon like basically like a well, I guess a spiritual weapon conjured from Gond himself. Maybe it's the ancient kind of echo of like a powerful weapon once created by Gond himself that's using a fraction of its like essence to come and serve you. Something along those lines. But it just does a bit of force damage, and it's just another body on the field that can be upscaled with you know, higher spell slots. We also do get an ability score improvement at this point, and I'm going to be bumping up our wisdom now that we're doing wisdom-based shenanigans. We're not going to be maxing out any of our spellcasting stats here, but you can do that with equipment in the future, or other things like maybe the Mirror of Loss, if you wanted to truly optimize this build, but otherwise, 18 is a perfectly fine final stat for our spellcasting stats in this game, so don't worry about it too much. Next up, at Cleric level 5, we're going to gain access to Cool, Lightning, and Sleet Storm, which I personally didn't use for this build when I was doing my testing, because again, not really the focus, but we do gain some other cool things from this level. We're going to get Destroy Undead, allowing us to deal radiant damage whenever we use Turn Undead, as well as we're going to gain access to level 3 spells. And of course, we're playing a character that can work in both melee and at range, because again, we haven't really got into the melee stuff yet, that's more of the equipment thing. But we are now going to gain access to Spirit Guardians, which is most likely going to be our main concentration spell for this build, allowing us to encircle ourselves in a kind of aura of radiant or necrotic damage, most likely radiant for us, which is going to damage and slow anyone who comes near, or whenever we go near enemies, which is going to allow us to close in for powerful melee attacks. We're also going to be picking up Glyph of Warding, which comes with either a fire or thunder variant. Basically, we're going to put a trap on the ground, and when an enemy steps on it, it will explode, but you can also just cast it directly under the enemy, causing it to explode instantly, basically making it a wide AoE elemental attack for us. It does also come with like sleep variations, lightning variations, just pure force detonations that push people back, so you can knock enemies off of cliffs with it, so it has a lot of fun utility. I think a lot of people overlook this spell, but it's actually extremely fun and extremely powerful, and it actually works with our Destructive Wrath feature, meaning that you can cast it, use Destructive Wrath, and then it will deal maximum damage when it explodes, even if it explodes a bit later. So that's actually quite fun, like a max damage trap that's just lying in wait. So it's quite a fun spell to have, so I personally recommend it for this build. And our final level is going to be Cleric level 6, giving us access to another Channel Divinity charge, which means another use of Destructive Wrath, as well as Thunderbolt Strike. Whenever we deal thunder damage, in our case, to a creature that is large or smaller, we can push it up to 3 meters. So now we have a bit of battlefield control to go along with this build. We do get another spell at this level, but it really doesn't matter what you pick. I'll go with Mass Healing Word. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a lot of magical versatility. 2 really powerful damage types in fire and thunder. Usually, if a creature is resistant to one, they're not resistant to the other. So you've got a lot to work with there. You also have some of the more powerful concentration spells in the game, like Slow and Spirit Guardians. You also have options for a lot of battlefield control through things like Glyph of Warding. And you do have access to Sleet Storm and such like that if you wanted to go down that route, but I personally wouldn't. And so basically, you're just going to be picking a powerful concentration spell, usually Spirit Guardians, and then just blasting and hacking away at your enemies. You also have Sanctuary and, high charisma and all that sort of thing, that comes with like a Sorcerer Cleric mix. Sanctuary obviously being an extremely powerful utility spell to help you out in a pinch, as well as, guidance and resistance, plus the high charisma is going to make you extremely good as the face of the party. This build is just going to be doing a little bit of everything. Is it the most powerful build I've made? Probably not. Obviously, if you went the Storm Sorcerer Lightning route with this build, you'd be playing a much more powerful character, but that's not the point. The point is that this character is extremely fun and versatile to play. Meta magic combined with cleric spells is actually extremely fun. Being able to cast like a control spell or something like Spirit Guardians as a bonus action, then running in and doing a melee attack on your action, or running in and doing like a big thunder wave or something like that. You really do have to experiment with the meta magic in this build to make the playstyle fun, because trust me, it is extremely fun. But let's have a look at the equipment, which is, again, like with most of my builds, where things really start to kind of come into their own. Let's start off with our main weapon of choice here, the Corpse Grinder. As you can see, we already have 27 strength because the potion effect has been applied, because I just did the combat testing. So, with Corpse Grinder, this is an Act 3 two-handed maul. The reason I decided to go with a two-handed hammer here is because obviously while it doesn't quite look like a forge hammer, it still can kind of function as one. Not to mention it comes with inherent thunder damage, as well as the 1d4 of fire damage that I've put on it with the Drake Throat Glaive, turning it into a +3 weapon. Overall, a hammer that mixes both fire and thunder, which is what we're kind of going for here, felt right to me. And again, with this kind of weaker, smaller character, I think it's kind of interesting to have a big two-handed hammer that they have to use effort to swing without the potions, and often not doing very well with, kind of being like in contrast. Because again, if we just used a little one-handed warhammer that kind of looked more like a blacksmith hammer, it kind of defeats the purpose a bit visually, but if you wanted to go down that route, you absolutely could. But I personally think the Corpse Grinder is perfect for this build. Like I say, thunder, we can put fire on it, and it also comes with the tenacity ability, meaning that whenever you miss an attack, you deal bludgeoning damage anyway, so it kind of works for our characters' weaker shortcomings. They're not going to be very good with a hammer, at least as a martial fighter. So getting that little bit of a, kind of boost, maybe a blessing from Gond, like, just, come on, dude, just hit them, I don't know, I think there's something fun to be had there. As well as the Grand Slam ability, a unique attack for this weapon, dealing an extra flat 4 thunder damage with the attack, and pushing enemies away, so just a bit of a fun, big strike attack that we get that's unique to us. But of course, this is an Act 3 option. In the early game, you can pick up the Hammer-Halved Hammer. This is available in Act 1, and whenever you jump, you deal 1d4 thunder damage in a 3-meter radius upon landing. With the potions of Hill Giant Strength that you'll have at that point, you'll have about 21 strength, which means you'll be able to jump pretty far, meaning that you actually can get some damage out of this weapon's feature. It also comes with tenacity as well, so it's a pretty solid option for you in the early game. Again, can be buffed to Drake Throat Glaive to make it a bit stronger. Next up for our equipment. I was actually quite happy with this build because all of the equipment I'm showing off here can be obtained as late as like early Act 2, so this build actually comes online quite early. However, as you go up into Act 3, you can obviously get better equipment as you go, so it's entirely up to you if you want to optimize this build a bit further, get some more damage out of things here or there, but I do quite like this build as it is with this equipment because I do think it all kind of works. The idea I went for with this equipment is that, again, we're compensating for our lower than average physical abilities with magical effects from equipment that we've either created or ourselves or someone has created for us. So let's get into it. First up, we have the Grimskull Helm, obtainable right in Act 1. Attacks cannot land critical hits against us. We get resistance to fire damage, which again means we can resist our own fire that we create, and the fires from the forge, as well as giving us access to Hunter's Mark, which we probably won't ever use, but hey, it's there. Next up, the Dwarven Splint Mail. The Dwarven Splint Mail will let us take 1 less piercing damage, okay. We gain a +1 bonus to strength saving throws, also okay. But we also gain a +2 to our constitution, which is going to give us a decent HP pool of 98 without any aid, as well as a basic constitution score of 16, which is pretty damn good. Again, bumping up our weaker physical aspects with, you know, sort of like a Gondish armor. Again, this armor just comes with the blessing of Gond, making up for our shortcomings. And also coloring it in Feywild green and Dundun, if I kind of angle it, makes it kind of look like a armored blacksmith's apron, or at least it would if it wasn't bugged and actually connected properly, Larian. But thanks to my buddy Kirk for actually pointing out that this color combination works this well with this armor for what we were going for. He brought it up on stream, so shout out to him. We also have the Gloves of the Automaton. This is bringing in a little bit of Artificer influence, basically allowing us to kind of turn on one of our gadgets that we've made in order to kind of go into like a kind of, what do you call it, as like a super mode, where we like temporarily augment ourselves, which again, probably not the safest thing to do, but it allows us to activate Circuitry Interface. Circuitry Interface allows us to, for 10 turns, at the cost of a bonus action once per short rest, become a construct, or at least considered a construct. This means a couple of things. Basically, certain spells won't work on us, like Hold Person, for example. We won't be able to benefit from healing spells. We have to rely on potions, which again, kind of works for an artificer. Bit of potion crafting here and there, as well as giving us advantage on all of our weapon attack rolls, which is great, as well as resistance to lightning damage. Overall, it just kind of felt like a fun artificey gadget, and you actually do get it from one of the kind of, you know, inventor gnomes that you can save in Act 1. So, but you do get the gloves in Act 2 because you meet them later on. So it actually felt like it made sense. It's something this character would do, and the way basically helping their fellows, as well as getting something that makes sense for the build in return. Obviously, probably not the optimal pick, really, but you can't deny it's like how good it is for this build roleplay-wise. And finally, the Boots of Elemental Momentum. This is kind of a throwaway slot, put whatever you like in here, but I'm getting tired of suggesting the same boot options over and over and over again, so this is a fun Act 1 option that makes sense for this build. Whenever we cast Acid, Cold, Fire, Lightning, or Thunder damage with a spell or cantrip, we gain momentum for 2 turns. So for using the elemental abilities that we're going to be using anyway, we're going to be getting extra movement speed, again using magic to augment our lower physical capabilities. Basically, momentum itself gives us an additional 1.5 meters of movement speed per remaining turn of the effect. Again, so basically cast a spell, and then, you know, speed off with your little legs. Totally not cracking every bone in your legs as you do so, but, you know, you can just heal that back later. This build is it's so messed up. It got more messed up as the video went on. But yeah, no, fun little shoes that you can get, fun little pair of shoes that you can get in Act 1, but feel free to swap them out for whatever you like. Next up, we've got a pretty classic combo here. We've got the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation, allowing our Fire Cantrip Thunderbolt to gain more damage equal to our spellcasting modifier. Basically, thanks to our level 6 Sorcerer feature as well, we're going to be getting this twice over, which is great. Unfortunately, it does say whenever we deal thunder damage with a cantrip that this would apply, but there is no thunder damage cantrips in this game, so I have no idea what they were on about. So yeah, this is only going to work with Firebolt or Produce Flame, but otherwise still a fun combination. Speaking of, the Ring of Arcane Synergy. Whenever we deal damage with a cantrip, we gain Arcane Synergy for 2 turns. Basically, this means that Arcane Synergy, as an ability, gives us additional weapon damage equal to our spellcasting ability modifier. So we cast Firebolt, maybe with Quicken Spell, so we do it as a bonus action, and then smack with our hammer afterwards for big damage. Even more damage with the effect of the Ring of Elemental Infusion. Whenever we deal cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage, or acid as well, with a spell or cantrip, we gain an extra d4 of that damage type on our next weapon attack. So maybe as a bonus action with Quicken Spell, you can cast Firebolt, then go and attack with a big hammer attack that does a lot of fire and thunder damage in addition to extra damage from Arcane Synergy. All in all, a fun little combination, but feel free to play around with this as you like. And finally, I will just quickly go over the 2 potions that we use for this build. First up, the Elixir of Hill Giant Strength. These are obtainable pretty much infinitely from Ethel in the early game, so then it just sets your strength to 21, the kind of lower level of the 2 potions, and then in Act 3 you're going to get access to Cloud Giant Strength, which is 27. If you maybe you could come full circle with this character in the later acts, maybe later on in the game, at Act 3, they kind of overcome their addiction, and then are kind of rewarded later on in the adventure by finding the Gauntlet of Hill Giant Strength, which just gives them a permanent strength boost in a way that's not destructive to them, and even maybe the Amulet of Greater Constitution as well, if you wanted to go down that route. Again, I won't spoil too much about what happens in the endgame, but there's definitely a lot of ways that this character can kind of redeem themselves, or kind of get out of this rut they're in, or they can spiral even further. It's entirely up to you how you want to play this character, but I think the genuine struggles that this character will have with their own kind of physical health at the start is kind of interesting to explore. So yeah, I quite like this character roleplay-wise. I think the theming is quite fun with fire and thunder. Oh, the other thing I will mention is the kind of combat footage is kind of playing as we kind of head out of the video. There is another kind of buff you can get in Act 3 that I actually think would make sense and kind of reflect the destructive path that our body is taking, and that is the Unstable Blood Potion that you can get in Act 3. Basically, the Unstable Blood Potion would allow you to, basically, whenever you get hit by a melee attack, you kind of explode with fire. I think that makes a lot of sense for this build, so I would absolutely recommend picking that up. I believe someone suggested that in the live stream as well, so shoutouts to them. So yeah, I think that would be a kind of another on-theme buff to pick. And obviously, you could also go for the Illithid powers as well. I'm not entirely sure what I would pick. I definitely think Psionic Overload, though, would absolutely make sense for this build, giving you an extra D4 of psychic damage, but also basically damaging you every turn, which, let's be honest, makes sense for this build, so I would absolutely go with that. So yeah, I would say that is a pretty good little setup there, a bit of Psionic Overload. I didn't use it in my testing, but you absolutely could go that route. And honestly, this build is strong, it's just not optimally strong. It's still a very strong build that's going to do what it needs to do. The meta magic options mixed with the Cleric and, you know, Sorcerer features are just going to go great. You have the maximum level of spell slots, so you can upcast for big damage. You have a lot of AC thanks to heavy armor, as well as our stats across the board being pretty damn good. Charisma is going to be great for being the face of the party. Wisdom is going to be great for those tricky saving throws. Constitution is at 16, meaning that we're going to be decent in combat. And Strength, obviously being as high as it is thanks to the potions, means that our strength-based stuff is also going to be good. The only thing that we're going to be missing out a bit on is initiative rolls, but again, that makes sense for the character. And our intelligence is a bit lower, which I don't know if that necessarily makes sense for this character. Again, if you wanted to roleplay this properly, you dump that con and put it into int. And again, maybe that can come full circle if you get those powerful late game options for equipment, like the Amulet of Greater Constitution, so that you could safely dump con, and even maybe change up your armor as well, and put those points into int. Entirely up to you how you want to go about this. There's a lot of interesting things you could do with this character narratively, reflect through the equipment as you move throughout the game, which is why I mainly suggested early game equipment here, because I actually felt like there's a lot of room for you guys to experiment with how this character develops as you go throughout the game, so I'll leave the rest of that up to you as the player. Which is really what these builds are about anyway. They're just guidelines. Don't copy me one for one. Build on it, improve it, and do it your own way. That's the whole point. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed making this build with the community. We've got one more deity build to go through. That is Joaquin, because technically Joaquin is in the game. Very technically, and there's a very interesting deity as well that's going to be fun to build with, and it was kind of a request from the community, or at least someone in particular, that we do it. So we're going to get Joaquin next week, as well as a deity build stream following some time after. Again, now that I have a bunch of time off, we can be doing streams pretty much at any time in the week. So again, if you really want to make sure that you're part of live streams, be sure to join the Discord so you get instant notifications whenever I go live. Anyways, that is going to do it for me today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.